And please join me in welcoming to the stage the director of today's film, Christopher Zalla.
The Racket Club lights are really strong. My background is kind of nutty. I was born in East Africa to a couple of parents who moved around a lot for work. My dad was an agricultural economist and my mom's an anthropologist, and they both worked quite a bit in developing countries. And they split when I was 4 and had joint custody, and they kept moving around, and my brother and I would sort of go back and forth between them. It was different. By the time it was over, I lived on 4 continents, more countries than you can count on 2 hands, 13 different schools. And one of those countries was Bolivia when I was 8 years old, where I lived for a year and a half, which was ironically the first place where I actually, that year and a half was probably the longest I'd lived in one place up to that time. It's where I picked up Spanish. And I probably, since then, have kind of kept an ear to Spanish and have sort of stuck with it. So that's kind of, I guess, how you could say I, as a person, came to be able to make a movie in Spanish. I was always kind of an outsider in a foreign land. Generally couldn't speak the language. Generally was new, and so telling a story like this was probably in some way a personal thing. I went to the I went to Mexico City because I felt very strongly that New York, this is a movie for me about New York as much as anything. I mean, New York City is really a main character, and funny little backstory. When I was in Bolivia as a kid, we had a car that was illegally smuggled into the country, and every time we lived out of the city in the country, and every time we went in, like the army would chase us. And they would catch us, and then we would get like in trouble, and someone would get like $5, and then we would go away. But I developed this terrible fear of cities, and somehow I spent the last 10 years in New York. But for me, New York really punched me in the gut the first time I was there, and I wanted to capture that rawness and that energy that I think we all experience the first time we go to New York. And so I went to Mexico City. Ben, one of our producers, came with me, and we cast there. And we were really lucky to find, again, some of the best actors in the entire country who really wanted to do this part. And so it was a real delight to do that. And in a way, one of the cool things about global cinema, I think, is that you suddenly have access to this treasure trove of people who, at least an American audience, might not be as aware of. And I think it's a real kind of treat to be able to share that with ourselves. Those are some of the biggest actors in Mexico up on the screen. I'd say there are 5 Academy Awards under their belts in Mexico. We actually did a focus screening in New York, and we had a rough cut, and we invited some Mexican immigrant friends of ours who we knew, or through friends of ours, people who we could get to, and we asked them to define the kind of movie it was, and they said adventure film. So it's a different, because it's not, obviously for them it's not it'd be like an American going to Egypt and having his identity stolen, and ooh, what's this interesting new place, and from their perspective. Yeah, it started actually with personal experience. My best friend was Argentine, and he came to New York after college. I met him in college, and his student visa expired, and he was not able to get formal work, and so he found a job at a restaurant, like many people do. And I would go out with him after work and got to know his coworkers, who were invariably these kids from Mexico. And as I got to know them, I kept hearing kind of the same story emerge, which was this sort of plan, which was to come here for some number of years. For some it was 20 to 30 years, which for a 16 or 17-year-old kid is kind of, wow. And the plan was to then go home, return home at some point in relative wealth. And I just started imagining someone who was at the end of that period of time in their life, and for one reason or another wasn't able to send money home, and because he was undocumented, couldn't get a bank account, for example, and so was just forced to stash it. And it was that image of that pile of money, really a pile of paper. I mean, some of these people, they work 6-7 days a week, 12, 14 hours a day, and this is the only thing that someone could have to show for their life. And for me, that was just such a great, powerful image. It was the central image that I was talking about before, that I wrote the movie for, that sort of generated the movement. The movie. And in terms of the veracity, it's just, as a writer, you pay attention to things. It started with the ending. The very first idea I had was for the ending. I made the movie for that ending. Which is weird. I mean, it's kind of the way I work. I usually get like a central image, and then I kind of deconstruct it and try and get there. Well, to start with the second part first, we had a very specific scheme when it came to visually how we were approaching the movie, with respect to color especially. I thought of Diego as very cold and dry, and Magda as very warm and wet. And these were sort of two opposing homes, essentially. And we wanted to really differentiate the experiences of the two boys. For me, Diego and Magda are two characters who have essentially written life off, and who are very much punishing themselves on some level. They're just doing it in different ways. One is through self-denial, and one through sort of self-indulgence. And so that was the sort of the color scheme, and so we really did try and sort of kind of remove those warmer colors from Diego's world, and have them more present in Magda's, and actually we had these little things like white flowers and red flowers and that sort of thing. This was a real collaboration between myself and the actors, and I gave each of them their entire part, and I sat with them and I said, I want you to say every line as you would say it. I want you to rewrite it. I want you to make it your own. And there were a lot of little beautiful moments in the movie that were completely a product of that, and of a real improvisational atmosphere that we tried to create on the set, so that they would just sort of go. So that story of Juan in the bar, which is weird because it's like, how could that story win over the father, which is, sort of, unfortunately, something that can work. That was just him going over the top, and I just let him go. And in terms of the male side of things, I don't know. I think there are a few things going on. We certainly, I certainly, have familiarity with that culture, which I would call, when you're focusing on kind of the male side of things, I would say that maybe it's just a little more, slightly maybe more exaggerated than others, but it's really that they're just not as afraid to show it. I think if you condensed it into what we actually, like if you condense short days into whole days, because a lot of it, I really wanted to, for a lot of the daytime sort of street stuff, I wanted to be totally invisible. I wanted to shoot real people. I wanted to I always feel like it's so staged when you have extras kind of walking through camera. So scenes in Chinatown or whatever, I wanted to be essentially invisible, and in those moments it was just a few people on the crew, but in total probably about 35 days, and we shot in Super 35. The first scenes are in Mexico. Yeah, we went down there for about a week, and really went kind of from Tijuana east along the border for about 6 hours, and just kind of ran and picked stuff up as we went along, and it was very adventurous. We firmly believe that there's a sleeping giant of an audience for this movie. That there, right now there are 30 million Mexican people living in this country, for example. And for them, this is not an art house movie. This is an event film. I want to thank the programmers at Sundance for having us here. Sherry Freelo, especially, who wrote our little write-up in the guidebook, who I believe is very hoarse today and couldn't be here. But really want to thank them for having us. You know, without a place like Sundance to sort of serve as a lighthouse, really, to keep an eye out for material that might not otherwise find that opening with which to then find that audience. Independent film would be in a really dire state in this country, and so I really want to express our appreciation for the work that they're doing, not just for bringing our film in here, but all the other great films that they had for the stuff.